Hello everyone, welcome to the very first Process Mining Café of 2025. We are very excited to be here and we are happy to have you as well with a very important and practical topic today. We are talking about challenges and best practices. And in fact, the basis for this discussion today is an article that we wrote after last year's Process Mining Camp, which we collected based on all the input that we had created together at last year's Process Mining Camp. And this article is a collection of 13 challenges and 97 best practices. And if you haven't seen it yet, don't worry, we will share it with you afterwards. You can read through it. You don't need to have the article at your disposal to follow this discussion today. It's just a very practical topic. There are a lot of different challenges, how to make process mining successful, and we are going to talk about the different dimensions today. For this discussion, I'm very happy to be here with our very own Rudy. Hi, Rudy.
Hi, everyone.
And we have a very special guest, Vinicius Steindani. Hello, Vinicius.
Hello.
Now we are coming back to you in a moment to introduce a little bit more. There's just one thing I want to mention before we start. We are doing this Process Mining Café live, so you can join the discussion while you are watching this if you want. And that's very easy to do. Just below the video where you're just seeing this on the Process Mining Café website, there's a link for the chat where you can click on. You can just click on this link. There will be a new window opening. You can type a name, any name. You don't need to have an account or something. And then you can enter the chat. And we will keep an eye on that and pick up any comments that you have or questions throughout the session. Okay, so we get started. And I think we should introduce you a little bit, Vinicius, because you're the perfect guest for this episode. Because in fact, at least part of your research topics, you're a researcher at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and part of your research topics is about the topic of challenges and best practices. So please tell us a little bit more about how you became interested in this topic and what your background is.
Hi, and so as I mentioned to you guys a bit before, I wouldn't say I'm the perfect guest for this moment, but I can be one guest for this moment, a guest. Mainly because the challenges and the process mining initiatives terminators that we worked on during my PhD project, they are more related to progressing process mining insights into actual process improvement. But indeed, the challenges, they are more or less similar in different points of process mining, and either in adopting it, in using it, and also translating the insights into actual improvement. So I accept partially the perfect guest part.
That's also a very scientific way to put it. You are very precise. You're not the perfect. You're a guest. So we have invited you for that reason. You are the researcher here today. So Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, and answering your other question about how I got interested into this topic. This is a bit of a longer answer, but I will try to make it short. During my project, initially the idea was to investigate event log extraction. And because of Corona, it ended up that I could not go to the companies we had planned for. I could not then extract the data and try to understand more about it. And I needed to use the time that we had in those lockdown moments to read the most papers that I could. Back then, I worked on trying to understand the different manual efforts involved in event log extraction. And after reading many papers, I started noticing this recurrent, how will I put this recurrent theme. It started getting clearer and clearer to me that the papers that I was reading, they were never talking about fail stories. They are never talking about when process mining adoption was not producing the expected outcome, which in the long run is to actually improve the process. So that's when I started getting more interested into this topic, and alongside with my supervisors, we decided to follow that path. And
so just to understand, so do you mean that there were only positive stories? So there were only positive examples?
If you look only for literature specifically, over and over again, you hear about how process mining was used to derive great insights, to derive awesome recommendations, but it stops there usually. Sometimes they talk about how good was the return of investment in using process mining, but you never read in those papers the cases when there was not a successful implementation of process mining, and particularly you do not read about what happened exactly with the process mining insights. Until our work, then we started shedding some light on this direction. And we believe that there is a lot of opportunities for practitioners and academics to investigate this further.
Yeah. And if you say do something with the insights, you mean not academically, right? So you mean more in a practical sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, it's like both two things at once. So maybe you were a little bit suspicious that there were only positive stories. So maybe there were also, maybe people didn't tell like the stories that didn't go so well, but also from the insights, how do you actually translate it into an actual impact in the organization? You didn't see that part reported in those cases, right?
Yeah, when they report, they always do this successfully. Yeah. At least from the case studies that we looked into.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is a very practical topic, right? So, I mean, of course, in the research field, there are a lot of different topics. So you can do very theoretical work, working on algorithms, and you can be very close to the actual organizational practice. So it's very interesting, and that's why I think, it fits so nicely here today to have you, because you were, focusing on this kind of practical side, right, in your research. I'm curious how did you do that? Did you review papers? Did you perform interviews? Can you tell a little bit more about your research methodologies?
Sure. Yeah, we started by reviewing papers, and then we followed these up with a number of interviews with practitioners. And what is particularly interesting is that we managed to interview practitioners with several years of experience in process mining, and many of them, they also had research experience. So many of them also followed and pursued a PhD in process mining. So that was particularly interesting to do. I really like interviewing people, so it was amazing. I prefer to be on your position and to ask questions rather than to answer them.
Yes, so you did these interviews, and based on those interviews, you then collected the answers, and you were looking for patterns, right? What you could take out of these discussions.
What is particularly interesting about the way we approach it is that we did not directly ask the interviewees what are the challenges they face. We did not directly ask them what are specific causes to terminate a process mining initiative. The main question that we asked them was what happened to process mining insights. And from answering the answers to this question, then we started to notice these patterns coming over and over again. Talking about challenges, talking about specific causes why process mining initiatives fail.
Yeah. but then you assume that there was an insight, right? So that means that certain requirements are already fulfilled. Otherwise, you cannot even get that insight.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. So you published several papers from this line of research. So also when we publish the video in 1 or 2 weeks or so, we will make sure to include the links to those papers. So everyone who's watching this now, you can read the detailed insights from Vinicius' research later on. But yeah, I think now we can come to the discussion of the challenges from the article that we produced from last year's camp. So the idea was that we're going to do 3 rounds, right, Rudy and Vinicius? Because there's 3 types of challenges. Actually, we identified 3 groups of challenges. There are data challenges, there are process challenges, and there are organizational challenges. And there are different challenges in each category, but what we did is that each of us picked like one favorite challenge from each group, and so we're going to talk through them. And I'm curious. So I'm curious what you have picked, Vinicius. So if we're starting with the data challenges, which data challenge have you picked from the 13 challenges in the article, and why?
So I've picked the data quality problems. I think it's a natural selection from my side because I worked quite a lot with this topic. And seeing the other challenges, I'm not saying that they are less challenging, but I know that the data quality problems can lead to many challenging situations, and it demands a lot of manual effort to overcome that. So that's the reason I pick it. And when we think about data quality problems, we are basically thinking about things like different formats for timestamps, or we are thinking about irrelevant data in your event log. We are thinking about redundant data in your event log, and so many other things that I could enlist here. From also, of course, several different researchers that wrote great papers on the topic. But I think I will stop it here by now.
Yeah, that's often what we see in practice, right? So the data quality is never good enough. Huh? So it's this kind of your hand is never full enough, and I think so. It's not only the problem of the data quality, but it's also kind of being able to juggle that it's never good enough, right? And then still being able to get tangible results. But I think as a researcher, right, then there is a point where you cannot have results at all because it's too bad or it doesn't make any sense anymore. And I think there is kind of a difference between the academic perspective and the more practical perspective, right? And then the other dimension is to do something about it because that's also one of the challenges. It requires an investment, right? And an investment at a place where process mining is often not really part of. And so that's one of, I think, the interesting things if we look at the data quality and the quality elements. So the first one is, can we juggle data quality or not?
Yeah. I agree with both of you because really I'm completely with you here because that in my view people are often too worried about data quality. They think, oh, our data is not good enough, we can't do anything with it, and that actually prevents them from getting started. So in practice actually I would encourage them to start with the data that they have, and that's what you mean with juggling, right? So of course you still need to be careful what you then do with it, because certain parts of the data might not be usable, or you might not be able to use it for certain types of insights. But for some things you can use it. So yeah, you shouldn't. That shouldn't stop you. At the other side, I also recognize what you were saying, Vinicius, with that there's a lot of research about it, and it's a great thing. Actually, it's one. You're right. It's, I think, from the challenges here, the data quality challenges are one that's really well represented in process mining research. There are a lot of different papers and categorizations and studies, and also approaches how to deal with it. And I think that's a really good thing, because it shows that the research is close to the practical problems, because it's a very relevant practical problem. So.
Yeah, it's the old story of garbage in and garbage out.
Exactly.
Right? One thing that we noticed in one of the papers that we worked on is how differently people talk about and refer to the same issues here and there. So we had a master's student in Liu that she worked on trying to set a high-level understanding and nomenclature for different pre-processing tasks, for example, that can help novice process mining practitioners and perhaps even data scientists in steering their tackling of data quality issues. So one thing that we see often also, not only research-wise, but also in practice, from the experience I've had in practice, is that also oftentimes we see the same data over and over again being stored in different systems in different ways. And this seems to be a constant issue for organizations, right?
Yeah. Just to clarify, are you talking about the work of Cici or a different researcher?
Yes.
Cici. Yes. We can link to that, because we did a process mining café with her actually in November, talking about data preprocessing tasks and about these classifications. So that's for those interested in process mining research. It's a good episode. So we will link that too.
Cool.
Yeah, so one of the things I see in practice, right? So this is a more practical thing. Yeah? So instead of a more academic thing, is that people tend to solve a data quality problem at the end, right? So they extract the data, they see that issue, and some issues you can solve, right? So also during the training, we show that certain issues can be fixed, maybe by improving the data quality. But a lot of these issues can also not be resolved, right? So, and then I'm talking about juggling, right? So you still want to find some interesting results without drawing the wrong conclusions, right? That's still partially garbage in. So there is some garbage out, but that doesn't mean that you cannot do anything with the result. But on the other hand, is also to realize where to fix it, right? And I think that's also an important aspect that's still quite challenging, because it's also not easy, right? You cannot quickly fix a system or introduce, in practical sense, a ticket where you change the ERP system to collect data in a different way or to collect additional information. And that's also one of the big challenges, I think, in the data quality problems, and even in the problems where we don't have data at all.
Yeah, and we also know that data quality problems, they can be the cause for process mining initiatives not to be successful in improving the process itself.
Or not started at all, right? So if we talk about reviewing whether or not it was a success, they say, we need to stop here, right? We cannot even start the initiative because it's not there. And that's also what we see still sometimes, where people are not able to step over this challenge and not be able to either confront the organization or to propose something that can solve or fix this problem, because it requires an investment upfront. It's not only the investment in all the other aspects like skills or a tool or something else, but first the groundwork in order to be able to collect the data in a good way.
Yeah, and what is funny at the same time sad is that we oftentimes hear about situations where an organization hired a process mining consultant, purchased the tool, and the consultants noticed that they had lots of issues with data quality, and because of the data quality, the money they invested for purchasing the process mining tool for the consultant was simply thrown away because they didn't want to invest more money to improving something before actually using process mining. So it's funny and sad at the same time.
I would tend to see it in a more positive light. I think, if that really happened, then I think also maybe in the project planning, maybe the steps weren't done in the right order, because usually you can find out very quickly like how good the data quality is and what you can do with it. So that's the thing. That's why you should always start with the data that you have, and you can look at it and you get a sense like how much you can do with it. And even if you cannot answer all the questions maybe that you had the ambition to analyze, usually you can do something with it, right? So it's, I think, not that often that you can't do anything.
One anecdote that I have for that is an organization that, when they learned about all the trouble they needed to go to for abstracting the activities, the events they had, they simply decided to leave the usage of process mining completely. So yes, oftentimes you can reduce a bit the scope of process mining project. You can deal with data quality issues, but sometimes the incentive for that is not there. Sometimes the support from the stakeholders to go through all that trouble is not there. And this is also a challenge we will talk about soon. So hanging there.
Yeah, but I think, and that's also kind of the misconception, right? So that's why I'm saying people think that everything is ideal, right? So they have all the data, exactly. They can do the ideal initiative, they have read all these successful papers which you were talking about, right? And then they start doing it themselves, but then they realize that it's a journey, right? And that's what people are forgetting, is you can promise them whatever you want to promise, right? What it could bring eventually, but eventually it's the journey to get there. And there are a couple of hurdles which you need to take. And I think, especially if you look at the organizations which are 10 years in, 8 years in right now, they have done the journey and they have done a lot of these iterations, right? And they are still doing iterations for certain systems, because every time when they do an iteration, they get further and further, and they solve it for one system, and then they realize that another problem pops up in data quality of another system, or when you start combining it together, or when things started to change again. So you need to still be on top of things. So it's not something you can kind of fix at once. It's something that needs to evolve over time. And then I think if you never looked at it, or if you abandoned it at the first try, you will never get there, right? So that's also something I see. And
that's the thing. You don't know yet also what you want to have, right? So only by actually starting with your process mining analysis, you know the type of data that you need, really. So you can't do it perfect from the start, I think, like you were saying.
Hardly.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you there, but I completely agree. And I think also we should not forget that the insight into the data quality problems are the first value already. Because
it's true. That's a nice way of looking at it. Yes.
Because often you are not just using the data for process mining, but maybe also for other things, and data becomes more and more important. So gradually improving the data quality is a value in itself. So
and maybe kind of in the contrary, sometimes you see if you have all these detailed data, then it can also be kind of the other way around, right? So you have a lot of quality, and that can be overwhelming, right? And then I'm meaning if you have all these detailed activities and all these detailed events, then you get so much detail that it gets really overwhelming, and then people get lost. What do I need to do with it, right? So then you get on the other spectrum, and that's another challenge in the process aspect, it's complexity, right? So then you need to deal with complexity. So these things are also kind of balanced out.
And maybe that's a good opportunity to bring in a comment that we have also in the chat from Marcus. He said that he believes that process mining helps to identify data quality problems in a very simple and comprehensible way. So that underscores what we're just saying.
Thanks, Marcus.
Actually, there's also a question I'm seeing now from Hanin. Is there any type of assessment for the data to be done before signing the process mining project contract? And that's a very good point. So we just talked about the scenario with the consulting project, right, Vinicius, that you mentioned as well. So when we were, so now we are not doing consulting, right? We're focusing on Disco and developing the methodology and all that. But at the beginning of Fluxicon, we did consulting projects too. And one thing I was always doing there is that I had kind of the project phases structured in such a way that there was kind of a milestone early in the first part of the project, where the feasibility of the data and the quality of the data was to be judged, and then based on that, you can have this built-in breaking point where you decide, is it worth to continue with this type of process, or should you maybe pick another process because there's too big problems with the data, for example. So that's maybe one tip you can take on to have this kind of breaking point built into your project plan from the beginning. So that's maybe our answer for Markus and Hanin. But I would say, let's move on to the next challenge, right? Otherwise, maybe we won't get through this in 1 hour. So really, which data challenge did you pick?
So of course, as part of the data quality problems, data skills become more and more important, right? Also in the light of process mining. And so the next challenge is the lack of data skills. And if we look at data skills, and if I take myself back 15 years ago, right, when this kind of all started, data was also there, but I think it was different, right? So people were working a lot in Excel, using and processing data for their profession. And I think this has changed, right? So we have access to more data. And so last time when we are at camp, I asked the question, how much data do you process? It tends to be normal for also process analysts to process more than 1 million rows of data, right? So if I take myself back 15 years ago, this was not possible in just Excel, right? So then it was just 10,000 rows was already kind of a big data set. So the amount of data has been changed, the complexity of data, and then I'm meaning how many attributes you have, how much detail you have in these events have been changed over time. So that means that it asks also more of the process specialist, right? So if we look at process mining, the process component is still quite big. To be able to understand the data and to maybe extract data, process data, and be involved in the data transformation. And I think that has become more and more a key part of the whole process mining exercise, right? So it can still be a tandem of a data expert and a professional. I think there are a lot of scenarios where that still is the case, but I think also the responsibility of the analyst should be able to understand how the data is processed and be involved in the data processing to make sure that it's aligned with the goal. And this is still, I think, one of the big challenges, because that also requires to look at yourself, right? And that's also what I'm doing, and ask myself the question, can I still do enough, right, regarding the data extraction and preparation? And that doesn't mean that I'm the data expert, right? But I really need to understand, I see this data set, and how do I work my way towards kind of the result which I want to get. So the whole thought process.
Yeah. For me, one point you just mentioned really resonates. It's the point that the analyst who is performing the analysis of the process mining, who's performing the process mining analysis in the process mining tool, they need to understand how the data was constructed. And that's so true. There are so many choices that need to be made in the data preparation process, which ultimately impact also what you can do in the analysis phase. So if you have no understanding of how the data was prepared, that's not it's not a technical implementation detail or something. It's essential to the core, of what the process mining practice is about. So that's why also in our process mining camp, for example, we are addressing all dimensions, right? We're not just talking about the analysis, but we're also talking about the data side of things.
Yeah.
And if we actually, sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, go on, please.
So what I often see in practice, what then becomes the problem of the lack of data skills, is that the capability is not available internally within the organization, right? So often you as an analyst would then say, okay, I need to extract and prepare this type of data. So I need to request a BI department or data science department and the data scientist to do this for me, right? And then that capability is just not available, right? And that's kind of then being marked or linked to the lack of skills, right? And there's kind of twofold, right? So it's the lack of capability, or the lack of skills, right? So you can kind of solve this problem on two ends of the spectrum. And that's kind of where you have to decide how to deal with this.
Yeah. I'm curious, is this something that came up for you too, Vinicius? Maybe you wanted to talk about that?
What I wanted to mention is that linked to what you said, if you simply make your data better or more beautiful, or you standardize a specific value, or standardize a specific format, or you decide to change a particular label of an activity, or what I want to say is these decisions that you make, if you are not aware that they will affect the analysis outcome, yes, it can be very problematic. And again, then we go back to the need of this data, this process mining expert, to be aware also of this specific thread.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good thing. So a very nice example is still the example of a municipality where they extracted process mining data from SAP themselves, right? So they started to look at the process to get this done through some kind of data expertise center or body to do it for them. But then they realized that it would not be feasible or not be possible in the short term. They didn't have this knowledge up front, but then challenged themselves to do this, right? And they started simple, and it was not an easy task. They started to use tools which made sense for them, right? So no programming, no Python, right? So that was not suitable for them, but they used an ETL type of tool to be able to kind of model the data extraction and the transformation steps. And it was very nice to see, because these first maps kind of look easy, or they would kind of easily explain what they actually did. But yeah, I think 17 versions down the line, this was a really complicated thing, right? So it was almost kind of a spaghetti type of diagram of work what they have done. So, and then you see how many decisions they have made along the way in order to get this right.
Yes,
So
yes.
also as a data expert, if you kind of would do that for them, it's not easy. It requires a lot of interactions and discussions. So that's a very neat example where this shows how this is done.
And we can point to that really, because it's they wrote the case study about it, right? It's the city of Vienna, who have documented like their experiences in a step-by-step description of this project, where you can really see these different phases in their audit project, and particularly for an auditor, right? If an auditor needs to judge the process, they need to have the full understanding of how the data was prepared to know what how they should interpret things. And so we can definitely include this link. It's a very nice case study by them, where you can see this also in the show notes. But what you're also saying here, I think, is one of the things that we sometimes give as advice for process miners who are maybe experienced on the process analysis side, or maybe even on the process mining side, if they are looking for a way to expand their skills. Like really, sometimes they ask us, what should I do? What should I learn about? And that's usually one of the things that we tell them. Well, it's actually useful if you can expand your data preparation skills a little bit. You are going to be more independent, and that's going to be very useful for your own process mining projects.
And basically, what we are stressing is the importance of making the data extraction preparation repeatable, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's an even additional skill, right? Doing it once and doing it multiple times. So
yeah. That's also kind of the balancing between the professionalism and kind of the hobby kind of way to be able to extract the data. And that's often also kind of a balance, I think, in practice. So if you are not being able to do it at all, you cannot show it, right? So then that's a stopping moment to continue. But if you are kind of hobbying your way through the whole process, then being able to show it, and it's also easy to replicate, and for somebody else to be critical again, right? And to say, if we standardize it, then this should be the approach, and this is the most flexible, repeatable way to do so.
Okay, so should we go to the next data challenge?
Yes, it's yours, Anne, right?
Yes, exactly. The one that I picked is security and privacy concerns, and I just think it's a very important topic in general for any data analysis, also for process mining. For process mining, fortunately, we don't really need usually, hypersensitive information. You can usually just extract information about the process, not about, for example, the customers, or you can leave out information about the employees, for example, right, if they need to be protected. But the one thing that I always recommend is that people think about this from the beginning, so that they really think about what's the goal of their process mining analysis and which data do they really need. And even if there are certain concerns, there's all kinds of things you can still do. You can anonymize, pseudonymize the data in different ways. But think about which data you collect in the first place. So with Disco, that's a very important topic for us, privacy as well. One of the reasons that Disco is so suitable also for sensible processes is that it runs completely locally, right? So all the data is analyzed locally. You don't upload anything in the cloud or somewhere, so you can keep a closer watch on it. But as a process miner, also think about which data you are extracting in the first place. So that's one important piece of advice, I think. Anything that you would like to add to this point?
And try to minimize the data to what you really need. This is a particularly important thing, especially when you are dealing with trying to understand specific behaviors of employees or more sensitive data. If you do not minimize the data to what you actually need, you can more or less in an easy way identify the employees, for example, by the specific tools they are using or the time they are working on a specific project. So minimize the data to what you really need.
That's a very good point. Sometimes you think the data is anonymized or you've removed certain types of information, but you can derive that information in a different way, right? So
I think one of the other important aspects is to be transparent about your goals, right? So what is your goal with the analysis? And that takes away a lot of these ideas that you would maybe do something bad about it, or and that is for wrong purposes. And,
that's also somewhat related to change resistance. And you can easily freak out people with what process mining can show you. Again, it's important to start small, as you already mentioned, and Rudy, and trying to gain trust from the users or the employees or whoever is going to be affected by whatever results process mining can show, and be too truthful about it.
Absolutely.
And again, let me go back 10 years, right? So if we go back 10 years, there are more procedures, right? So that makes it, it makes it more complicated. But on the other hand, it makes it also more transparent, right? So you just have to go through all of these procedures. And these procedures take additional time, so you need to account for them, right? So that doesn't mean that 10 years ago, maybe you can start tomorrow, right? And now it takes a couple of weeks before you kind of get clearance in order to do so. But the procedures are more clear, right? So they are not fuzzy anymore. They also with the rules, GDPR, but other rules which are also coming in. It's more easy to judge what you can do with the data and what would not be a good idea, right? And of course, you also have a responsibility as an analyst in order to balance this, but there's also a process in place that helps you in this, in cases where it's more gray area. I think that makes it easier, I think, right now.
That's true. That's true.
But it just takes more time.
Yes. I want to stress maybe this one point that I think both of you were making before, which I think is really important, is that by addressing the topic, like what the goal is and what you're doing with the data, you can actually bring in people and put them at ease, right? Because ultimately you need their cooperation in the project anyway. So you want to work with them, and to do that they shouldn't be freaked out, like you said, Vinicius, right? And I think there we have seen some really nice examples for those of you who are looking for a starting point for that. So for example, Leonard from the city of Lausanne, he is using an ethical charter that he's discussing with the business people in his organization before he's starting a project, and he has shared that with us. So we have a couple of pointers that we can put in the show notes also for you to see that, and that then enables those people to speak their truth and to work with you, right, to make process mining successful, which is what we are talking about here.
Nicely put.
Thank you. So I'm just seeing there's another comment from Marcus, which I think might be related to the previous point, but I will briefly read it anyway. He's saying perhaps a top-down approach is also needed from the business use case to preparation and analysis. I found gaps, especially in the business understanding. So I think that relates to the data skills, and that's, I think, also a valid point that we can maybe add on top of that discussion. So, I would say let's move to the second category, the process challenges. Vinicius, which process challenge did you pick?
Well, I picked the lack of process mining methodology. And what I mean about process mining methodology is that the organization have a very specific step-by-step approach to implement and to get good results and derive useful insights afterwards. We have many different approaches that can be taken, particularly from the data science point of view. We have some very settled methodologies, but also in process mining field, we have some very interesting and widely used ones, such as the PM square, and we can definitely leave a reference for that after the talk. So usually what we need to think of about this process mining methodology is that we can bring together many different aspects. So you need to have a proper plan, and you need to know that you need to know exactly what you want to extract from process mining from the beginning. In several examples that we have from practice, it's quite often when someone hears about how good process mining can be, and just because of that, they think they can and they should apply process mining to whatever in their project or in their organization. So if you do not have a clear plan and a clear notion about the data you need, and particularly the questions you want to answer with process mining, which then steer your data extraction part, it will be basically very hard for you to be able to analyze anything and derive any useful insights.
I'm curious, so does this come up also in the interviews that you were doing, that people were lacking kind of a structured approach?
Definitely, yeah. Okay. Definitely, yeah. On top of this kind of challenge, we also learned that in some cases, this particular example of when someone hears about process mining and wants to apply it, and then they do not know where to start from, it can lead also to people get not interested anymore in even trying to know about what process mining is. So.
Yeah. And then can you share what are the roles of the people who you interviewed, right? Because you mentioned it was focused kind of on process improvement side, right? So
I interviewed business process analysts, process mining analysts, consultants, project managers, directors, and more or less in this line of work.
Yeah. And then if they talk about a methodology, do they agree kind of on the same structure of approach, or do they start at the same
Well,
same task, and do they end at the same task, or do you describe it differently?
Yeah, talking specifically about the interviews, it's been a while. I do not remember it by heart, but I do remember that many of them referred to different ways of tackling it, which doesn't necessarily mean that we should not advertise better what we know from practice and literature about the methodologies that we can recommend and suggest. So this particular issue of lack of process mining methodology, it's also makes me think about the issue of lack of training in organizations to know about these kinds of things and to keep this in mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think people sometimes overestimate a little bit their own knowledge, or they think they don't need to know much, right? So they don't see that process mining is not just a tool, but it's really a practice. And that there are many different things that belong to it. So that's why, right, Rudy, we have the 12-step approach that we are teaching in our trainings, and that we have on the blog, so we can also link to that, which is exactly what you were saying. So people need to have this as a reference to make sure they're not forgetting something and doing things in the right order. So I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah, and about looking at process mining as another tool, it's quite often also when people think that process mining is more than a tool. So they think that by hiring a process mining tool, their process will be improved automatically, which is not the case. But this is a different story. I'm diverging here, sorry.
No, yes, you're right.
Yeah. So when I look at the process mining methodology, right, so that's, for me, it's often something that's already there, right? So it's not, the methodology itself and the step-by-step approach and all the activities that you're not doing should be introduced, right? So that's something we can agree upon. But part of the methodology is tied to the goal which you want to achieve. And there could be different goals, right? So if you have a more audit compliance type of practice, then that could be something different, right? Reducing risk or use it for a specific purpose. While if you want to improve a process or want to make a user experience better, and then it has a different purpose or different goal.
Yeah.
But it's particularly, sorry to interrupt you, Rudy,
sure.
But it is particularly interesting that you said that for you, process mining methodology is already there. It's already in your head,
that's
right?
the point where I want to go, right? So
this is not the same for everyone.
It's not the process mining methodology itself, but it's the umbrella which you need as a vehicle in order to achieve your goal, right? So it's not that process mining brings you the methodology to improve processes, right? So there are a lot of different methodologies which you can use, right? You have the traditional BPM life cycle, but you can also use Lean Six Sigma or DMIC or Lean. And there are several methodologies which have been successfully or unsuccessfully adopted by various companies, depending on the goals which you want to achieve. And they also change over time, right? So 20 years ago, everyone did BPM. Then a lot of people started to iteratively improve processes. So they started to adopt Lean, also in the service industry, right? And now they have transitions to more agile type of way of working, right? So there's also something that changes over time, but it should fit the culture and the way how the organization works.
Yeah, and the use case, right? If you're looking at auditors, they have their own methods. So
of course, that's different, But then it needs to fit in, right? So don't try to introduce something with process mining as a methodology that's completely new and that's completely going against what you are already doing. So try to fit these 12 steps just in to your common practice. It's much easier to adopt, right? Otherwise you have to continuously explain why it's different, right? And you need to defend yourself. While if you say it's just a marriage of what we're already doing, and it's a tool which we sometimes use, and sometimes we use other tools, right, as part of the whole package of, in Lean terms, the belt and all the tools which we kind of use in order to improve the process, right? And I think that's that's much easier as an introduction and as an adoption eventually.
Yeah, but it's something that we are explicitly saying, right? We are saying like the 12. That's why also in the challenges, actually, if we're looking at them, there is a distinction like about the process mining methodology, which is referring to the 12 steps, or which is, let's say, our equivalent, Vinicius, of the PM square, which is more used in the research side. But then what Rudy is saying is, and that's, I think, coming back in the organizational challenges, the process mining 12 steps themselves, they're agnostic to the context in which they are used, but you have to have a context around it. You have to have, like Rudy said, the goal, and then the existing methodology, the existing way of working, it needs to be fitted in there. So every process mining project is also about learning how to integrate process mining into this existing way of working, and whether this is lean or BPM or the existing audit methodology. So I think that's very important to have this distinction, but it's always taking place in this context.
Yeah, and it's basically what I meant with the need for this step-by-step approach, that you have this clear in mind, that you need to follow, and you need to remember about some specific things. And this also links back to some things we talked about earlier. For example, we mentioned about these checklists for the data. That can be useful for you to understand how your data situation is. So this can be an initial step on a methodology that you take.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I would say let's go to the second process challenge. Rudy, what did you pick?
Yeah, so missing domain knowledge, right? So if you look at the analysis, then sometimes you think you can do without, right? So that's kind of how our approach is. So domain knowledge, what is it, and when do we need it, right? So if we take that example, Vinicius saying, you're a consultant externally, right? And you don't have the specific expertise of the process, right? So there are also consultants which have seen a lot of the same process, right? So they can bring this domain knowledge, but assume that they don't. What can they still do, right? So how far can the analysis go? And so in my thought process, then it would be that I often do this, right? So in calls with potential customers or with customers, they show their process, and then I'm still able to point them into the right direction, right? So I'm doing a couple of things in order to lift out the process. And so looking at where's the logical starting point of the process, where at the end I need to have these specific questions, right? But I have a structure in mind in order to get there, to get to their process. And if I'm there, then I'm able kind of to guide through the steps. But I cannot do without the domain knowledge, right? So if they cannot clarify where the begin and the end of the process is, or if they cannot clarify what the meaning is of a particular step where I see rework, then I cannot draw the conclusion, right? I can say, I think this is rework, but I could be totally wrong, right? Because when they have the contact and they say, but we normally do this step multiple times because I have to assign this activity to myself, for example, it's not physically rework, then it is not rework, right? So that's where it requires a balance. So for me, the process mining tool without domain knowledge can be a tool that can be used kind of as a guide in order to get there, right? So just like Google Maps can be a guide to get somewhere, right? But you need the context in order to be able to draw logical conclusions. And the big problem lies in the fact that the obvious things which you see at first, these are not the interesting things, right? So these are things they already know, right? It's the hidden things that lie 2-3 layers deep. If you slowly kind of peel the onion, that they will say, oh, yeah, this is something we didn't know, right? So, and if you get the response, or people kind of go back and then say, oh, yeah, this becomes interesting, then you start to slowly work your way there. Yeah. But this cannot be done without the domain experts, right? So this cannot be done without the context of the process itself.
Right. I just wanted to interject and say that even if you're showing things that they already knew, sometimes that can help to build trust, right? So that what you're showing them is real. So if there is something very obvious, like you're saying, maybe not interesting because there's a very clear explanation for it, it can be still a good point because they say, oh yeah, that's real, right? So could be still useful.
Yeah, but for that you also need domain knowledge, right? To do that, have that clarification. So domain knowledge becomes a key aspect of the process mining analysis, right? So if we look at the analysis side, I don't think you can do without, right? So you can either have the domain knowledge yourself. So that's sometimes what we see. That is kind of the analyst already has a lot of context of the process because that person looked at the process quite often. Maybe that person was even part of the process in previous roles, right? But if you don't, and if you don't have the context, then it can go horribly wrong. And I have an example, right? So I've looked at the loan process before, and then I just got the data. I didn't have a lot of knowledge about the process. I know what the product was, but not so much the process. Start looking at it, and then I made assumptions, right? So if I'm just drawing conclusions right now, I saw that there was applications coming in, and then they went from the online process, they went directly to rejection. And I said, oh, that's weird. That's wrong, right? It should not happen. Why do you reject already online? And eventually, when I started to discuss this with domain experts, they started to say, yeah, this is very good because this is our online credit check going to work, saying that these are individuals which have not a good credit record, right? So we already start to reject them, resulting in less effort later on in the process, right? So without this context, you can draw wrong conclusions from the things you are seeing, right? You observe the right things, but the conclusions are requiring a little bit more of the domain knowledge.
Yeah, very, very interesting example. Yeah. So, Vinicius, did this come up also in your interviews, the whole domain knowledge?
Yeah,
problem?
Of course. But I think Rudy put it very well. I wouldn't know how to add up to that. But indeed, it's very easy for you to see a particular partial order between two activities and think it's fine. And when we show to the domain expert, he will say that that's not how it goes, or that's not how it should go, based on some particular rules that he knows. And you, as a process mining expert, you would never know.
That's interesting you say, because that's often what I see. It's also about status quo, right? So that's one other pitfall. I'm not sure if it's directly related to missing domain knowledge, but if you don't have SLAs, right? So if you look at the process and there is no status quo, right? So I have a domain expert, I'm an analyst, we are looking at the process together, and that person is continuously saying, looks good. Everything's fine, right?
And you show to another one.
Also, we can show more, we can go more detail, but the person is continuously confirming that that's reality, right? Yeah. But it's also, the person doesn't have an opinion how it should be, right? So it's just accepting the status quo as you go.
Sure.
And that also previously realized that I should prevent this before we actually go into the analysis, right? So I need to trigger people to say something about how it should work, or make at least some kind of statement or definition that I can use during the analysis in order to confront that individual, to not just accept everything as it is, right?
And usually a value stream mapping session can help with that, right?
Of course, very good,
Yes, it can help for many things, right? Also other things we have discussed earlier. So if you have a picture of from drawn by the process expert, the subject matter expert, the domain knowledge expert, then you can use it to understand your data, to get the right data in the first place. But then also once you're doing the analysis, to relate it back to them and to show them, well, these are the differences that I found. And
and as Rudy said, it's indeed hard to find the right domain expert sometimes. So that's why I think that the value stream mapping session is particularly useful, because then you put in the same room different people that work with that process. Yeah. So it's not only one person saying their opinion, or perhaps they are just bored and they just want to agree with everything and don't want to help much, or they are afraid of sharing all the knowledge that they have and others don't, and suddenly they will become less useful for the organization. So there are...
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
plenty
Sometimes they can also have a kind of a tunnel view, right? That's also something
True.
we discussed, Rudy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also kind of what the goal of your analysis is, right? So is the analysis in order to make small improvements, or is the goal eventually to overhaul the processes? Sometimes also we see that you do a process mining exercise to see what the current state of the process is, but that could help to give you some valuable input in order to completely revisit how the process is now being executed. And yeah, that has a different value than you can do a lot of value stream mapping, have these opinions in. But maybe you just want to see, okay, we have now 5 or 10 steps, and we want to reduce it to so be different principles should be completely STP, for example, and then you start looking at the process completely different, and then have So also the goal of the analysis requires kind of slightly different view of how you would use the domain expertise. But of course, yeah, it's one of the aspects where it's just subjective, right? So it's an opinion, but an opinion that can help you guide to get to a point where you want to be. And it's also, again, up to the analyst to take the things out that are considered to be relevant, right? And it's often the points where you either don't agree or where the domain expert says, oh, that's weird or strange. And it's also a point where you don't get all the answers, right? So that's sometimes people expect that, oh yeah, then we know what the root cause is, right? No, it's the effect. And you still need to kind of figure out, maybe ask more people what they think or what could be the potential cause of this.
Yeah, but I think there are multiple things the process mining analyst can take away from these points, right? So first of all, I think it's very reassuring to know that even without domain knowledge, you can learn something, right? Like you said, you get actually to a certain point, you can get a general overview. You need to pay attention not to draw conclusions from that without the domain knowledge, but it's not that you cannot start without domain knowledge. But yes, so then you have to bring them in, and that's the second side of it. So you have to have access to domain experts if you're not the domain expert yourself. Sometimes people are using process mining who analyze their own process. That's ideal. Then you have both like in the same person, but usually you need to make sure you have the support. And yeah, I think we don't have time to do the third round through the organizational challenges, but that's of course one of the things that comes back there, right? You can all read the article, stakeholder involvement management, project management. So you need that's one of the number one things that you have to have access to domain experts.
So maybe one more point here, right? So if we are not doing the organization, it's the start point, right? So involving the domain expertise is kind of the start point of the change for me, right? So you start to involve the people who can have impact in the process, right? So if you involve the people who are actually part of the process execution, when you start showing them the process map, then it could already take effect when people go out of the door that the process start to change for the better, right? Because they realize, they tell their colleagues, and that's that requires some preparation, right? In order to make sure that you slowly are getting there and involving them in the right way.
Yes, and let me make one more connection with the domain expert, also back to a previous point that we have discussed, namely the first one, Vinicius, data quality. So that's one of the things actually on our checklist, on our data quality checklist, is that you should be doing a data validation session with a domain expert, where specifically you're not looking at any analysis questions yet, but the goal is only to see how useful is the data and where the problems are. And that's also one recommendation that we give to build trust, first of all, to find problems in the data, but also to build trust with what remains, that you can really work with it. So, little tie back there. So anything else we wanted to say about subject matter expert, domain expertise, or?
Well, there are so many things to say, but since the time is ending, I think it's a pity that we cannot talk about the organizational challenges because, as Rudy said, it's an important part to be taken care of. So without stakeholder support, you will not go much further. without change management in place, it will also be hard for you to actually improve the process and so many other things. But yeah.
Well, we can briefly talk about maybe one. I'll skip my process challenge. It would have been complexity. There's a lot of materials linked to that. So maybe we pick your organizational challenge, and that's the last one we are taking, Vinicius.
Or we could do a second round. No, I'm kidding. I will not put you into this suffering again. But yeah, I mean, I had picked particularly this one, the stakeholder support and sponsorship. Because, although in some organizations you do have quite some liberty, as, for example, a data scientist or a process mining analyst to conduct a process mining project by yourself, this is very rare. So oftentimes, if you do not have the support from a higher level manager or from even CFO, it's going to be very hard for you to actually do something. And particularly if you manage to get insights, it will be particularly hard for you to actually improve the process. So I think that these challenges, I would say, is the first one for you to check in your challenges checklist.
Yeah. Well, and that also maybe depends a little bit on where process mining is landing, right? Rudy, where you mentioned before, if there's already an existing Lean Six Sigma practice and people use it there, then it's easier to integrate something like process mining. Whereas, maybe in other contexts, it's maybe more difficult. But
yeah, maybe it also depends on who you are talking with, right? So I see process mining specifically kind of as a bottom-up, top-down approach, right? It could be the other way around, right? So if you think big, then it's often a kind of a top-down approach where you start with a very big project plan and then start it to condense in a big business case. And then from the business case, you start to break it down in different projects, right? And then started to harvest through these projects the whole realization of that program or project. But I think one of the interesting things of process mining is that you can start really small, right? So it could be one person with just one small problem and started to solve that particular problem, right? And then realize in their approach that it can be applied to other problems in the organization as well. And then other projects can be done by the same individual, it can be done under the umbrella of that individual, can be done by a completely different person, right? So that's how we see that process mining kind of also has evolved within organizations, but it hits a ceiling somewhere. And maybe what you were talking about, that it cannot be converted to something that's bigger than that, right? So you stay with the pebbles and never are able to move the boulders, right? And I think in that particular perspective, it requires a top-down approach. It requires some kind of umbrella of a stakeholder that has this influence that can take away some of these bigger challenges that need to be overcome in order to take the next leap, right? And it kind of depends which direction you take, right? Top down, bottom up. It should kind of move slowly together. Huh?
Yeah, I'm not so sure actually. I don't think you need to go top down and you don't need to make it really big. My feeling is that often the biggest challenge is also what Vinicius maybe mentioned at the beginning, is really to make the step from the insight to the improvement, right? So people need to focus on that and really make the actual improvement, and that's of course hard, right? Because changing is hard and there can be different things involved. Maybe you need to change IT systems or people. It's unclear which of the two is more difficult to change, right? So I think that's where I see the big focus.
Yeah, but so maybe it's also depending a little bit on the goal which you have, right? So if it's focused on audit and compliance, for example, it also remains often within that particular team, right? So then it doesn't have to be lifted further than that team, right? So they have this tool which they need for this particular goal in order to achieve it. And the rest that is needed in order, they either request it from other teams or they do it themselves. But if it becomes part of an integral strategy of the organization to improve processes, for example, then it hits somewhere the ceiling where it needs to have this higher management level support. And it doesn't mean that they do the process mining, right? So the process mining could still be done decentralized. But in order to break through the challenge, for example, to have end-to-end data for the processes through these different systems and make sure that that everyone does it in the same way, then I think that needs a certain push from the top down.
Yeah, I must agree with Rudy on that one. Particularly from after you get your insights. If you do not have a strong manager that has some good connections with the people that have the money, it can be very hard to go further.
Yeah, I mean, you need the sponsor also to get access to the subject matter experts, right? If this is not your department, you need the buy-in needs to be there from the process manager from that department, so that you can even do the analysis and get the support that you need. But then in the end, I think, what I would say is that it's also really important to really focus on making the change and focusing on not sliding back into old patterns. So how can you establish, for example, a routine to check up on if you have changed something, to check that every 6 months or something, that you are not going back to how it was before, so you can sustain the improvement, and also maybe having a little bit more of a focus than normally on the value that you have provided. So often people think about a business case maybe at the beginning of a project to justify and to get the approval, right? But I think it should also be a standard practice to do this kind of assessment after the analysis and the change, so that you can demonstrate the value that you have provided, and based on that you can then also make the next project and the next analysis.
It doesn't. I think the approach you are describing is still also bottom up, top down, but it kind of reminds me on how the lean belts are doing this, right? So the lean kind of classify the different colors of the belts, right? So you have yellow belts, green belts, black belts, master black belts, and they create kind of the structure where these projects are supported by the different belt groups, right? So that means the more challenging things you are doing, which requires either more money or more impact or more organizational change, right, requires higher level of management support or overseas in order to make sure that there is a smooth transition from the current way of working to the new way of working, right? And they don't see it as a very top-down approach, right? So it starts from the bottom up, but they start to realize that, maybe this is too complicated to solve by this individual alone, right? So we need to start other projects on other ends and then bring it together and then make sure that they tandem and then they integrate it back, and then it moves on to the next level. And then it's more organic, right? So instead of making one big plan and then start to break it down and then execute it, is more work what the things which you are already doing, but bring it into the right umbrella to make the right decision, to pave the way forward. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think that's a good frame, and we can certainly learn some things from that framework. Yes, I think we have to come to a close a little bit. There's 2 more comments from the chat I just want to read, so we add them kind of to the discussion. But then I also I want to ask you two last questions. So let's first see what was shared in the chat. So the first comment was, for me, transparency is one of the most important rules to avoid giving the impression that you are doing something mystical with process mining. It must also be clear to everyone involved with what the process is like, and that you don't always make friends with the results. So that's, I think, coming back to this whole discussion, that you have to involve people and take them with you, right? The second and last comment that we received is that tools document status changes, which are then visualized. The exciting thing is what happens between the status changes, and this always requires domain and business understanding. And that's a very good point, right, Rudy? That comes back to the whole domain knowledge discussion that we had.
Yeah, so that comes back to your data doesn't contain everything, right? So it's not the holy grail. It still requires something that doesn't exist in your data.
Yeah, but even if you don't see it, sometimes you have blind spots, but you see something is going on there. It's taking very long here, and maybe you're doing a second iteration where you're trying to get more visibility into this kind of blind spot that you have. Okay, so to close, Vinicius, one thing we wanted to ask you, you have seen this list of challenges that we collected after last year's camp, and you have your own research, right? So did you maybe compare them a little bit, and did you notice anything in our list that was missing, something that you discovered in your interviews that was not contained there?
Yeah, I did notice a couple of things that were missing there that I think they are worth mentioning. So one of the things that is a challenge related to expectations, and we should really take care of dealing with expectations from everyone involved. So it's quite often when people expect too much from process mining, or they don't expect nothing at all, and both extremities are very, very terrifying, because when you do not expect anything at all, you might face a very hard truth to swallow. And we've seen some cases where even these kinds of things led to denial of process mining insights and to termination of projects. So just to give a particular example, there was a situation where the process mining experts identified bad practice, let's say, being followed. And when they showed this to the project manager got him aside and said, okay, that's fine. Thanks for showing us this. You can go home now, just to summarize what happened. So dealing with expectations is a very important thing to have in mind, both in inflated expectations or no expectations at all.
Yeah, very good points.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I think these are the most important thing I saw differently. Of course, there are a couple of other ones, but you can then read in our papers afterwards that we will share with you.
You can maybe, if you have them top of your mind, you can briefly mention them. What else?
So for example, we saw very frequently the case of loss of interest. So if you do not have process mining project as priority in your organization, it might very well happen that projects with higher priority takes place, and people will simply lose interest about it, and you will lose the I forgot the word now. Sorry for that. You lose track of
the momentum.
Of your car.
Yes.
Yeah, the momentum. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Also, one thing that is very important to be very to emphasize a lot is how the data preparation can be an issue. Even though we talked about this already. I would like to emphasize that the laborious data preparation can be an issue and can lead to project terminations.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So
and lack of incentive. Yeah, but you can read in our paper.
Yes,
lack
exactly. We will point to your papers, and everyone can read the detailed results there. We will we will do that for sure. Thanks a lot for that.
Sure.
Final
Thanks for
summary.
inviting me.
Yes, you're welcome. Really, do you have any last thoughts based on this discussion?
Yeah, so I want to thank Vinicius for taking the time to share his thoughts and experiences and research, of course.
Thanks, Rudy.
Yeah, it's good to be aware of the challenges. I think important is to realize that it's for everyone, it can be a different thing, right? So there are so many different process miners with different backgrounds, with different skills, work in different type of organizations. And I think it's important to understand what's your biggest challenge, right? So where is kind of the biggest gap or area which is kind of missing, and then try to find a way in order to overcome this. And it doesn't have to be you, right? So we talked about acquiring new skills or thinking about stakeholder management, these kind of things. But it could also be finding the right person, right? So it could be a tandem with somebody else who kind of fill your gap and have a shared success together. And so it's also being creative and finding the boundaries of what you can and cannot do. And if you fall down or if you terminate, as Vinicius mentions, please pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try again, right? So it doesn't mean that it has to be the end of it all, right? So where on one thing you can fail, on another part of it you can have a big success. You have to have to be patient, right? Yeah, of course.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
It's easy. It is easier to terminate, right? It's easier to stop and to not do anything, right? And
it's always helpful when you know about the different challenges you might face along the road. So
of course,
Yes, and to learn about the challenges, you can read the article, you can read Vinicius' papers, and you can come to Process Mining Camp, because Process Mining Camp is going to take place again this year on 14th, 15th, and 16th May. So 14th to 16th of May in Eindhoven, again in the Netherlands. You will hear all about it very, very soon. And so that's also an excellent opportunity to learn about the challenges, exchange with others about their challenges, and to really advance your own skills. So we hope to see you very soon again in a Process Mining Café, or maybe at Process Mining Camp. And we'll talk again in 1 month with a Process Mining Café, where we're talking about customer journeys. Thanks again, Vinicius. Thanks, it was great to have you here, and thank you all for watching.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Anne.
Bye,
thanks,
everyone.
Rudy. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.